Hi guys, welcome to your very first video on the process of flying through the air, or otherwise known as flight. Today we're going to talk about the properties of air, and we're going to kick things off with a bit of an experiment. So I've got a bucket of hot water, a bucket of cold water, and this 2-liter with a balloon attached to it. So my first question to you is, what do you think is inside? Some of you might say nothing, and others might say there's air inside. And yeah, because we're talking about the properties of air, you'd be right. So there is air inside this. It's all sealed up nice and tight. And when I put it in this cold water, nothing happens to the balloon. But what do you think is going to happen when I put it into the hot water? You might have seen this before. Maybe you're just going to see it for the first time. But when I put it in this hot water, what's happening is the air inside the 2-liter is starting to heat up. And when air heats up, it expands. So I don't know if you can see that, but this balloon is starting to fill up with air. So there's no new air going in there at all. It's the same air, but because when it's heated, the molecules start moving faster and faster. That means the gaps between all the molecules spread out, and that means that the air inside is having a larger volume. So let's see if we can get that to stand straight up here with the hot water. And there we go. So the first lesson you're going to learn here is that when air is heated, it expands. And the opposite of that is if we cool air down, so I'll put it back in the cold water here, what do you think is going to happen? Watch the balloon. Trying to see if you can see it. It's really wilting away and starting to just go down to a regular balloon here. So when air is cooled, it contracts. And what that means is the molecules stop moving as fast, they slow down, and the gaps between all the molecules get smaller and smaller. And that's actually going to make the air more dense because it's more closely compacted. And so you can try this out at home. Next time you're having a shower, you can stick your hand way up in the air and you'll notice that all the hot air is rising because it's less dense, it's lighter. And if you put your hand down at the bottom, down at the floor, you'll feel all the heavier air, the more dense air. It's cooler. So 2 things you want to learn. Number 1, air takes up space. There's not nothing in here, there's air in here. And number 2 is that when air is heated, it expands, and when it's cooled, it contracts. Do a little experiment here with weight. So I've got my scale here. I want to make sure that you guys can see the reading on it. I'm not sure if you can. Should say 0, 0. I think you can. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure. There we go. This balloon with air and without air. So which one do you think is going to weigh more? Decide right now. Weigh the pros and cons, and we're going to check it out. So we're going to weigh this clip on here, and then the balloon, and then we'll weigh them both together. So this one with the air, and then after we'll let the air out, we'll do it again. So it's a 0, 0. I can see it there myself. All right, so got it on the scale. And that looks like 29.2. Is it backwards on there? Yeah, well, anyhow. So that's 29.2. Now we're going to let the air out. It's been sitting there for a little while. Get all the air out, put it back on there again. And we've got it at 28.8. So the next part that I want you to know for the properties of air, the third thing is that air has mass. Not a lot, but air actually has mass to it. Okay? And then we have one more thing we're going to talk about, the 4th property. Let's go back to our original setup here. Move these guys out of the way. hot water. Not too hot. All right, we're going to talk about compressibility. So compressibility means to squeeze something or squash it. So those balloons, you know how you can kind of squeeze them. So air is compressible, and we can use that because it can exert a force. So similar to how you fill up a tire and it's got a force in it, and then you're not driving on your rims or on your bike tire when it's flat, or you pump up a basketball, you can use that force to your advantage. So one thing I'm going to show you here is that there's not nothing in here. I've got a syringe here, connected by a little tube. So if I press on this syringe, okay, we're going to watch and see if this goes up at all, because I'm going to compress it and see if it'll exert a force on this one. So I'm going to push this one down. And you can see how that one raised a little bit. I don't know if it's exactly airtight, but that's how you use pressure or compressibility of the air. Compress the air to exert a force. Very cool. So let's recap. Got our 4 properties of flight. Number 1, air takes up space. Number 2, air expands when it's heated and contracts when it's cooled. Number 3, air has mass. And number 4, air can exert a force when it's compressed. So why would we do this? Well, we need to know all this to learn how to fly things. Okay, so these properties help us put things flying through the air and understand flight. We can use compressibility and air. Another thing, because it takes up space, it has mass, has this really cool effect with insulation. It's got an insulating quality. So that means that you can sort of make it like a barrier. Use air to your advantage and it'll hold things in. Insulation means that it's going to prevent heat loss. So in sleeping bags, there's air in there. Sometimes we put insulation in our houses, that pink stuff, and the air gets trapped in there and it keeps the hot air in and the cool air out, or vice versa if it's the summertime. And the last thing I wanted to tell you guys about insulation was dressing with layers. So I know it's warming up now, but instead of wearing one big heavy sweater, they always recommend like dress in layers. And the reason is because in between each layer of clothing, it traps a little bit of heat, so it keeps you warm. So insulation, compressibility, and we use it for flight. There's all the applications of the properties of air. All right, answer the questions at the bottom, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.